This acrylic painting tutorial will show you how to paint these two pumpkins on a faux wood background. We're going to start with a 3/4 inch flat wash brush, and the two colors on your palette are titanium white and raw umber. If you've never painted a faux wood background, it's really simple. I'm doing it this way. I'm dipping it in the white and the brown about equal amounts, and I'm using the full width of my brush to paint up and down on my canvas. And what's happening is the brown and the white are blending together to create this sort of streaky look of the white and brown blending together. And I'm not making it blend all the way into one solid color. I'm letting it be unblended to kind of create the look of the wood. We're not going for a totally realistic look here, but we still want it to get the impression that it is a wood background. Okay, so you're going to keep applying those two colors to the canvas, painting up and down using the full width of the brush, and this takes quite a bit of time to do. If you want it to spread just a little bit further, you can always dip your brush in some water, just a little bit of water. Don't do too much water on the brush because it will start dripping and making the coat of paint uneven. Okay, so you can also decide that if you like more of the brown, you could add more brown to it. If you like more of the white, you can add more white to it, so you can kind of calibrate how dark or light you want your background to be. And then when your canvas is completely all the way filled up, you're going to want to take a break to let it dry a little bit. You can also use a hair dryer, and you can also paint the sides of your painting with these two colors at this point. Right now I'm at the part of my painting where my background is dry, and I am going to use this T-square ruler to but I'm going to paint two lines to divide my background into thirds. So I'm going to estimate just by looking at it where the thirds are, and I'm going to place my T-square ruler where I think the thirds are. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm going to use a 12 flat brush or a 12 bright brush and the color Mars Black. So I just dipped it in the Mars Black, and I'm going to use the tip of the brush to paint this straight line. And using that flat brush on its edge will create that thinner line for you, and paint it right up the ruler to get your first line. So we're dividing the wood into threes to look like it has 3 panels. Okay, and you can kind of see on this video how I didn't line my T-square ruler up just evenly on the edge there, so I ended up with a slightly crooked line there, but it's not really noticeable in the end. So you're going to do the same thing on the second line, and we have 3 panels for our faux wood background. And we'll take our T-square ruler up very gently so the paint doesn't smear, and then I'm going to use the back of my brush to paint 3 little dots to make it look like there are nails on the wood panel, or it could be a fence in the background. Okay, and then we're going to do a little bit of wood texture here. I have a round brush. This is a 4 round brush, and I added raw umber to my palette, so I have the raw umber and the Mars Black, and I'm just kind of swirling it in both of the colors there. It's going to be a very dark brown, and we're going to do some texture in the wood. So I'm going to paint a little knot over here in the upper left corner, and I did kind of it looks like a moon, and then I'm going to paint some lines that kind of contour around that. Okay, and then let's do something kind of similar over here on the right. I'm going to start by doing the contour lines, and then doing the little knot in the middle, so maybe another little moon shape in the middle. Okay, and then I'm going to do some sort of vertical lines and maybe some lines that kind of contour a little bit around the first knots that I painted. And so you're just going to kind of gently paint in the texture in here. I'm not thinking too hard about where I'm doing my lines and texture. I'm kind of holding this brush very lightly so these lines aren't too thick, but I guess sometimes I'm pressing kind of dark so it kind of changes the consistency. And also I'm not adding water to my brush at this point, so it makes the lines look like they're kind of feathery and light. So it kind of helps with creating that texture by not adding the water and kind of give it a sort of a dry brush look. And then at the top, I'm going to make some extra dark marks at the top. Maybe it's kind of a weathered wood at the very top of the panels. Okay, so when you're happy with the texture, you are going to need to again take a break or get your hair dryer and dry it all the way, because next we're going to use chalk to draw the pumpkins, and that paint needs to be all the way dry. Okay, so when your painting is dry, we are going to get chalk to draw these pumpkins. And notice that I placed both of my hands in the lower right part of the canvas, because that's kind of a reference for how large this first circle is going to be. We're going to draw a large circle in the lower part, and this circle surrounds both of my hands, so kind of fingers sort of spread out almost all the way, and the circle it goes around both my hands, maybe a little bit larger than my hands. We don't see the full circle, it's kind of cut off on the bottom, so we don't see the full circle on the bottom, but we see it at the top and almost all the way on the right. For the smaller pumpkin, it's the size of my fist. So if I folded my fingers down and drew a circle around it, so it's kind of bigger than my fist, but it's definitely smaller than that large pumpkin. So I'm going to do the circle, and it's going to overlap the larger circle. And again, we see the full circle at the top, we see it on the right, and on the left, and it gets cut off on the bottom. The nice thing about pumpkins is we don't have to make our circle look perfect, because pumpkins are naturally lumpy. Okay, we're going to do the stem next, and I'm going to start by drawing the base of each of the pumpkin stems, and the base is below the top part of the circle. We don't want to make the base on the top of the circle. And then I'm going to draw my stem up from that base. So I'm going to have this stem curve to the right, and I'm going to have this stem curve to the left. So you can actually do any kind of stem. You can make it stick straight up, you can make a fancy kind of a pointed stem, you can make your stem go spiraled, you can pretty much do whatever you want with your stem. Okay, and then I did the little oval at the top of the stem to make it look a little bit 3D. And next I'm going to do the bumps. I'm going to start my chalk line at the bottom of the base of the stem, and I'm going to curve it down, and I'm going to curve the other side of that bump, the opposite curve down. So it's almost like I created a cat eye shape, only we don't see the bottom part go to a point. Top part doesn't really go to a point either. And then I'm going to do the next bump to the right of it and the next bump to the left of it. So I'm going to start at the base of the stem, and I'm going to curve down. Okay, and we have room for another bump on the left and right, but this bump is going to meet up with the already drawn circle line, so it should be a nice tangent for those two bumps. Okay, and then we're going to do two bumps in the back. So for this one, I just have to do a curved line and a curved line. Okay, so I was able to do a bump in the middle, the left and right, another one on left and right, and then two bumps in the back. I'm going to do the same thing for the little pumpkin. Start in the middle, Draw two curved lines going straight, not straight down, but curved down like a cat eye shape. Add another bump to the left and right to it. So curve it down, curve it down. Make sure you're always starting at the base of the stem. And then you should have an area where you can have that line meet that circle, so it's a nice tangent. And then you'll be able to do two bumps in the back behind the stem. If you mess up with your chalk, you can get a wet paintbrush and you can erase it, and then get a very soft tissue to kind of brush the chalk dust off of it. Okay, I am going to move on and I'm going to start painting my pumpkins in. I'm going to use my 3/4 inch flat brush in the color Titanium White to start off with, and I'm going to start by painting the bump in the middle, and I'm basically just going to paint that in by stroking my brush from the top down, and I'm going to fill in that entire bump with the Titanium White, using the full width of the brush, stroking down and having your strokes contour to create that bump. Then I'm going to dip my brush in the Cad Orange Hue without rinsing it, and I'm going to paint the same direction, but that Cad Orange Hue is going to mix with the white to create kind of a light orange cream color. And again, I'm stroking down, and I don't want to blend it all the way because that helps create the texture of the pumpkin when I don't blend it all the way. To paint the next bumps, I'm going to do the same thing. So start with your white and add the orange. And notice how I didn't rinse my brush off. So it's kind of unnecessary to rinse it off all the way, do the white, and then add the orange when we're going to be adding the orange and the white anyway. So I decided not to rinse my brush for that. So when we go to each of the new bumps, you can essentially just double load your brush in the white and the orange, and it'll create the same effect. You want to kind of, we don't want to lose our bumps here. So notice how I'm adding more orange to these left and right bumps, and the middle one is a tad lighter, just because we don't want it to all be the same shade of orange all throughout. We want to kind of make it look like a real pumpkin by making it look like it's got that pumpkin texture with the bumps. Okay, and as I'm going on to the next bump, I'm just following my stroke with the shape of the line, the direction of the line when I drew my bumps, and I'm kind of twisting my brush to fill in the area. Don't worry too much about that overlapping pumpkin because that's going to be painted over the large pumpkin anyway. So you can stop, or you can just paint the whole thing because it's going to be overlapped anyway. For the smaller bumps in the back, I actually switched to my 12 Bright flat brush. Just because it's a smaller area, and if you like to use this smaller brush for your entire pumpkin, you can do that if that works for you. But same thing, to double load the orange and the white, make it look a tiny bit different so that it stands out from the rest of the bumps. And I actually add just a bit more white right there just so that bump can stand out a little bit more. Okay, and we will do the lines of the pumpkin later, and if you lost all the bumps or if you're not quite getting this texture thing down, don't worry, because we'll go in and we'll paint those lines darker so we definitely see where those bumps are on the pumpkin. And I am just gently going back over some of the strokes just to blend it in a little bit, but you don't ever want to overblend for this. Okay, then I am adding primary yellow into the mix just to add a little bit more color variation into this pumpkin. I did not rinse my brush when I added that primary yellow. I just grabbed it with the orange and white already on it, and I'm just gently painting this primary yellow on all the bumps. and not making it overwhelm the orange, just kind of gently adding it in there. If you don't like the look of the yellow, you can always just not do the yellow, or you can go back and add more orange and white. Just be careful not to keep painting over it and it'll turn into one solid color, but we don't really want that. Okay, and so that's what kind of happened with mine here. It looked too solid, so I went back with my orange and just kind of brushed that over gently because my yellow took over just slightly. When you are done with the large pumpkin, we're going to do the same exact thing for the smaller pumpkin. Okay, so we're going to start in the middle. And this time I'm going to try it by just not starting with white. I'm going to just start with by double loading my brush in the orange and the white. So kind of the same concept here. So I'm starting at the bump in the middle, and then I'm going to work my way to the left and the right by again double loading the brush in the orange and the white, trying to get each bump to be slightly different than the one next to it, just so it can stand out, and trying not to overblend. So we want our colors to kind of look streaky a little bit to make that pumpkin texture. And again, when I'm done with the orange and the white, I'll add a little bit of yellow to it as well. And also for this smaller pumpkin, I'm using the 12 bright brush because it's smaller and it's not going to take up all that space like 3/4 inch brush did. Okay, I'm doing the little bumps in the back. Don't worry about the stem, and because that's overlapping. And also, speaking of overlapping, this smaller pumpkin is overlapping the larger pumpkin, so you want to make sure that you really did paint over the entire area so that it's overlapping that large pumpkin. Okay, I am currently adding a little bit of yellow into this smaller pumpkin, so just a few strokes here and there to give it that color variation. And so this painting would actually look kind of interesting if these two pumpkins were different shades of orange. Like if one was a very, very light orange, or even a totally different color like blue, and then another pumpkin a different color. So I just thought of that. Okay, anyway, we are going to completely rinse the brushes off because we're going to do this stem next. Okay, so for the stem, I'm going to mix the Mars Black and the raw umber together, and I'm going to use my 12 flat brush for this step. I'm going to outline what I drew with the stem, only so this bottom part, I made it pointed like a triangle. It wasn't pointed before, it was curved before, but I want to make it pointed before. So I used my brush to draw the point on the bottom. And then I was going to just fill it in using my brush with this solid color. I'm not worried about shading or anything like that. I'm just worried about filling the shape in right now. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the smaller stem, and I'll do that top oval part there that I skipped on the first one in just a second. Just skipped ahead here. And so again, you want to make the bottom of the stem kind of go in a triangular shape, and then paint it in. If you think that your 12 flat brush is a little too big for this step, you can always go to one of your round brushes and use the round brush for this. It would do the same thing. We are going to use the same brush and the same colors, the raw umber and the Mars Black, to do the lines of the pumpkin. So I'm going to add the color to my brush, but I'm going to wipe it off a little bit with the paper towel so I don't have an excess amount of paint on my brush. I'm going to start at the base of the stem and I'm going to stroke down. So just like the lines that we drew with our chalk, we're going to do the same thing again with this brown, and I'm going to start at the base for each of the lines and I'm going to stroke down. Notice that my paint sort of runs dry as I go to the end and the bottom, and that's okay. That line doesn't have to go all the way down. Okay, so I did the bumps, that tangent, the circle line, but I didn't paint the line on the circle, so that brown doesn't extend to the whole circle. Okay, and then so I'm going to repeat it for the little pumpkin. Start in the middle, do the 2 bumps on the side, do the lines that tangent to the circle line, and then the bumps in the back. And then just kind of gently do these strokes. Again, it doesn't have to be the continuous stroke. If it runs dry on the bottom, or if it doesn't connect all the way down, that is okay. And then I'm going over some of my strokes slightly there. Okay. This next step, I'm going to show you how to add a little bit of shading in your pumpkin, and this kind of helps to bring these lines back into the pumpkin so it looks like that's not kind of cartoony, but a little bit more realistic with the lines in the shade of orange. So I'm not going to rinse my brush. I'm just going to grab my orange. So there's brown on my brush, and I'm grabbing the orange on my palette, and just at the top part of my pumpkin I'm painting in. I'm actually painting all the way along the line there with the orange. So I'm doing the orange over the lines a little bit just to kind of soften that brown and get the brown just to kind of mesh in with the pumpkin. But I'm also painting in between the lines. So on the pumpkin part, again, there's just the little bit of brown on my brush and the orange, and to kind of get the lines to kind of mesh with the pumpkin, and add a little bit of shading too on the top area. I'm just kind of gently brushing that in at the top. Maybe on my palette I'll grab a little bit of yellow. Okay, so I'm just gently brushing that in just at the top part by the stem, and then it kind of brushes down and blends away. Okay, and this is I guess you can call this is dry brush, because I didn't add water to my brush, so my paint is very dry and feathery now. Okay, ooh, I got a nice streak of brown in there. If you see what happened right there, it gives it a nice little like a ding on the pumpkin, or a little brown mark on the pumpkin, so that's okay. Okay, so I'm kind of just doing the same thing to the small one, just adding that orange and brown combo, gently dry brushing it. Okay, I am going to do this stem next. Actually, I'm going to add a little bit of highlight. So I'm using the number 4 round brush in titanium white, and I'm just painting that oval sort of shape at the top to give it a little bit more of a 3D look at the top. And then adding just a little bit of white on the left sides. And I'm going to go back over it with a little bit more brown just to soften that white so it's not so bright. The brown's blending with the white. Okay. Next, we're going to use our 4 round brush to paint the green sort of spiral vines coming out of the pumpkin, whatever you want to call them, vines. So this is Hooker's green and light olive green. I'm just loading both of those colors on my brush, and I'm painting a very subtle vine that's coming out from the pumpkin. And I'm going to do it on both sides of the stem, and it's just kind of going out and sort of behind the pumpkin. I didn't want to make it take over the pumpkin. I didn't do leaves. Actually, I did leaves on a different version of this painting, and I thought it was a little bit too busy, so I did away with the pumpkin leaves. So just a very subtle vine. Okay, And then, so you saw me feel on the bottom part to make sure it's dry. We're going to do some grass on the bottom. I'm just going over my lines because the green is a little bit translucent here, so you may need to add several coats for it to really show up nice and opaque. Okay, so for the grass, I used my 12 bright brush because I want a nice crisp line. So I'm using the tip of my brush and I'm painting these strokes. So when you do grass blades, you want to start at the bottom and stroke up. And you want to load your brush in variations of that green. So when I go to reload my brush, I may add a little bit more Hooker's green one time and do some strokes, and then I may go back and reload in a little bit more of the light olive green to get that color variation. Doesn't matter if you start dark and then go light, or if you do light and then dark, or just do a mixture of light and then dark, just as long as you have that color variation in there. You can even add a little bit of titanium white in there, and that'll create extra color variations in your grass. Okay, so you want to kind of, again, stroke from the bottom up to get your nice crisp line with the tip of your brush on its side, and then make them go kind of wispy, no water on the brush, so the brush is dry, and the grass blades kind of go diagonally and straight and kind of all different directions, and they're in bunches, little patches of grass. Okay, I thought that was a nice little touch to this painting because the pumpkins are against the fence and sit in a little patch of grass. And then actually my favorite part of this painting is this little spider web over here on the right. This is the only time I'm using my 10-0 liner brush and titanium white. So to do the spider web, I did the curved outer lines first, so they contour with the pumpkin. So this spider web, the spider has found a home right here on this pumpkin. And then the two lines in the middle that curve. So I have 4 lines, and then we do the bump lines inside of those lines, and the tip of each of those bump lines meet the lines. So we do bump, bump, bump. Okay, and then you're going to continue this pattern. Obviously these curved lines are getting smaller as you go to the point of the spider web. Okay, and that is our little spider web, and it's definitely something that you see at a pumpkin patch. There's plenty of spider webs at a pumpkin patch. Anyway, this painting has come to its conclusion. I hope that you enjoyed painting pumpkins with me with a nice faux wood fence background and a spider web and little vines and grass. Such a fun fall, easy painting to do. Thank you for watching.